So looking at critical thinking as part of the reflective practice process, we need to consider some of the mechanisms involved in critical thinking. And these are biological processes, psychological processes, cognitive processes, and also communicative processes. And we can consider these in turn one by one. They do feed in one to the other. What they really refer to are types of thinking that we have as critical thinkers and as reflective practitioners. There is habitual thinking, the ways that we regularly think, brainstorming, creative thinking. There's also prejudicial thinking and emotive thinking. And let's look at these each in turn. Habitual thinking is what we will do regularly, in a way sort of unthinking, and we will rely very much on that in everyday practice. Brainstorming is very much about making judgments and evaluating, thinking creatively and innovatively about a situation. Creative thinking is making links between facts and concepts, looking at the principles of what we know and questioning those principles. And of course then emotive thinking. With any experience that we have, there is always an emotional response, and part of critical thinking is to understand that aspect of the process. So when we're thinking critically as reflective practitioners, we are relying on reason rather than emotion, as we saw in the previous section. We require evidence in order to be rational about the experience, and we are always looking to find what's right and what's wrong with the situation. Part of being a critical thinker is then about looking at contradictions in our teaching and confusions and asking questions about those things, critical questions. We're thinking critically then when we are actually self-aware. We need to consider the habitual processes as well as the more creative and emotive processes in critical thinking, and therefore our own awareness becomes a significant part of thinking. We also, of course, need to be honest, because critical thinking, the word critical in critical thinking assumes for us that there will be no cover-up of reality. We also, as critical thinkers, need to be open-minded, because without that mindfulness, it would be very difficult to evaluate things clearly, and we then couldn't be reasonable about what we're actually seeing and what we're saying. We have to also, of course, consider different viewpoints, different perspectives. So part of critical thinking is not about thinking in isolation, but a collaborative process, maybe with colleagues in the school, asking questions of them about yourself. And so we're thinking critically when we're being open-minded, so that we can explain or attempt to explain what is happening and try to model new approaches to experiences in the classroom. And by being open-minded, then we're accepting new visions, new versions, new priorities about teaching and learning. And what we are clearly doing is not necessarily rejecting particular views, but trying to understand all the different views which we're being confronted with. And we need to be very disciplined. Critical thinking is not something which can happen superficially. It is very meticulous, very comprehensive, very thorough. And therefore, what the teacher cannot do is just jump to conclusions very quickly. Conclusions need to be arrived at over time very carefully. And because of this, then, the critical thinker needs to be able to make good judgments in relation to their role as teachers. And what this requires then is a look at the evidence, the value of the evidence, the weight of that evidence. If we react too strongly to something which is perhaps inconsequential, not so important, then that's actually not a good judgment. We need to be able to understand the weight of the evidence. So we can look at the opposite side of this. Well, what is a non-critical thinker? A non-critical thinker is somebody who sees something very, very plainly. There's no subtlety to situations. For example, they see questions as yes or no, not as a maybe or a could be. And of course, somebody who's a non-critical thinker is not able to see the connections and the linkages between things which they're experiencing. A non-critical thinker fails to recognize all the many elements involved in teaching. And there are therefore some key attributes, some key attitudes that we can look at for critical thinkers about being open-minded and about separating the emotional aspect from the logical, rational aspect, about being able to question roles and responsibilities in the classroom, about avoiding common mistakes and not allowing mistakes to recur, but being responsible about them. It's also about communication, about building a strong vocabulary to describe what we're seeing and to describe ourselves. And what this leads to then is about knowing, making decisions about our role in the classroom and coming to conclusions.